Education and Business Scrutiny Commission. My name's Councillor Peter Babudu, and I'm the chair of the commission. Before we get started, I just have a few announcements to run through. Firstly, this meeting is going to be recorded by the council, and it will be uploaded onto the council's YouTube channel by tomorrow. All microphones will be muted on joining the meeting, and if you could remain on mute, please, unless you're invited to speak. And please do wait until you have permission before you speak, before you unmute your microphone. That would just be helpful to keep things orderly. To make sure the meeting runs smoothly, if we could just have one person speaking at a time, and when someone's speaking, if we could try and let them finish without interruption, please. If a member of the commission wishes to speak, could I ask that they indicate by using the raise hand function, or for anybody who can't see the raise your hand function, you can use the chat functionality as well, and I'll bring you in as soon as I can. All guests that join will be made attendees after they've entered the meeting, and a message should be shown on your screen to say this has been done. Also to flag that as this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the council's website, if you're planning to speak at the meeting, you may wish, if you choose, to switch off your camera so that just your voice will be heard. And anybody who's disconnected from the meeting due to technical difficulties, you should be able to use the link that you used to join in the first instance to get back on. And if we have any of the members of the commission or people speaking in the session who lose their connection, can you please contact Fitz or Everton via email or Teams so that we can adjourn the meeting until the connection has been restored. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot, tweet any of the public proceedings, and well, not quite finally, a copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. And just to say finally, in the interest of health and safety, we'll be taking regular breaks. So I'm going to try and get those breaks in when we have any transition points, so between interviews and so on. So that's all the announcements. Sorry, there were lots of them. So just to kind of say a fresh welcome, everybody. The kind of overarching point of this session is, as we're in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, thought it would be really useful to ask some of the pressing questions to the relevant cabinet members for this commission, and also use this as an opportunity to just finally wrap up some of the work that the commission's been doing over the course of the year. This is effectively the kind of last meeting of this commission as it stands with its current membership, as they stand to be reconstituted in September. So I wanted to make sure we have a chance both to kind of look back over what we've done and to have an initial think about the future work programme, as well as dealing with some of the pressing issues of the day. Great. So now to just jump into the agenda. Do we have any apologies for absence, Everton?
No apologies received, Chair. Councillor Hanvers is trying to get into the meeting at the moment.
Okay, great. Councillor Hungbo, I believe you've indicated that you will need to leave early. Is that correct?
Yes, this is correct. I will be leaving earlier, so my apologies for that.
That's okay. So we're just going to work through and confirm voting members. Great time for joining, Renata. You can take part in this. If you could please just indicate that you're present when I call out your name. So just to start things off, I'm Peter Budu, am a voting member. Councillor Hungbo, do you want to go next?
Present.
Councillor Carl Easton. Carl, if you are there, you're muted or we can't hear you.
Chair, I just got a WhatsApp message from Carl to say that he's having problems getting in. He's going to be late about 10 minutes. But he can listen in on his phone.
Okay, sure. All right, we'll move on. Renata, do you want to go next?
Yes. Good evening. I'm Councillor Renata Hamvas and a member of the meeting. And my apologies, I had some technical difficulties because I'm in a different location to actually access the meeting. But I'm here now, so sorry for being late. Thank you.
Well done. Well done for making it. Councillor Kerslake.
Yep, present. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And I'm not sure. Do we have Lorraine with us, Everton or Fitz?
No, Councillor Lord is not present, Chair.
Okay. All right. Councillor Mann.
Yes, I'm Councillor Mann and a voting member and present this evening.
Oh, great. Thanks, Eliza. Lynette, are you still with us? Well, you're on mute and your hand is raised. I can't hear you, unfortunately. Great.
It won't unmute.
Oh, there you go. I can hear you now.
Can you?
You're unmuted now, at least. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. Okay. And lastly, we have Martin. If Martin's with us.
Yes, I'm here on audio over the North Devon beach.
Oh, lucky you. Thanks for joining us, Martin. Great. So those are all of our voting members. Just onto item 2 in the agenda. We have notifications of any items of business which Chair deems urgent. And just to flag that we've got 2 supplementary agenda items. The first is the report from the Cabinet Member for Business, which is the supporting business resilience in response to COVID-19. And then the second item we have work with. We'll get to discussing both of those items in due course. Just on to item 3 is disclosure of interest and dispensation. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare an interest or dispensation in respect to any of the items on the agenda?
No, none for me.
Okay, great. Oh, Councillor Hungberg, go ahead. You're still on mute, William.
Yeah, it's fine now. Is
Yeah.
it okay now? About the dispensation, but I'm informing you that I'm one of the school governors for the Tower School. Just to clarify. So,
Okay, so you're one of the governors for the Tower Bridge. Great. Okay. So on to item 4 of the agenda. Can we just agree the meeting held on the 20th of May as a correct record?
Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Fantastic.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, all. So now on to the first substantive item of business. Item 5, is children return to schools, interview with Councillor Jasmine Ali, who's the Cabinet Member for Children's Schools and Adult Care. And I think you're joined by Nina Dohel, who's the Director of Education. I could just lead by saying a massive thank you to Councillor Ali and to Nina for joining us. We do realise that now is a particularly hectic period for both. But the Commission thought it would be really helpful for us to hear about how we're responding to the coronavirus pandemic, and we identified a series of questions that felt particularly critical for us to understand that we're appropriately dealing with things within Southwark. If we could just kick off by Jasmine, if you want to do 5, maximum 10 minutes, just running us through the kind of response that we stand, particularly around those areas we highlighted with our questions, and then we'll open up to the Commission for any further questions.
Thanks, Chair. Can everyone hear me all right? Because I can change to my iPad if the Is it all right? Okay, if it looks problematic, just flag and I'll change to my iPad because I think my white iPad's a bit odd. Peter, before I start, may I just say congratulations for your groundbreaking report on school exclusions, and just say that I really look forward to working with you in realising many of, if not all, your recommendations. So thank you very much for that. And it's good to see you all, in particular Lynette, it's really good to see you. And Martin, even if he's in Devon or wherever. Okay, I just wanted to say then, education scrutiny then, the impact of COVID-19 on education. Schools in Southwark can be characterised as a fourth emergency service. I mean, once schools were locked down, the majority of our schools in Southwark, in any case, remained open for vulnerable children, children with a social worker, with an EHCP plan, or with key worker parents. I've got the breakdown if you want to look at that later.
Do you want me to get up?
Oh, no, do you want first, okay?
Okay. Basically, pupils needing free school meals have shot up, and schools provided food for anyone that needed them while they waited for the voucher scheme. And some of our schools are really innovative in the way that they put food packs together. Some schools, including mine, the chefs were kept on and they did hot meals, which were delivered to families in that interim period. And lesson plans for primary school pupils not in school were sent out from many of the schools, and including mine. I mean, Chair, I had quite a lot of fun. I can say that now that the summer recess was here, but homeschooling a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And I have to say that the energy levels towards the summer were like really dipping. So the fact that the teachers were teaching key worker children and making the lesson plans is really great. Okay, for children in secondary, there was a concern about the lack of computers. The government, finally, but it's a good thing, they delivered 1,000 laptops to Southwark, and a lot of those were delivered by hand by our social work staff to children in our care. Okay, government guidance makes it clear that the expectation where young people are attending school would not have the curriculum, but they would be looked after, they would have interesting lessons, and their mental health would be paid particular attention to. Okay, the government schools plan then. I mean, basically, the government schools plan wasn't an average car crash. I think it was more like a giant pile-up. The initial plan for the 1st of June caused a lot of confusion. As you remember, they wanted reception year 1 and year 6 all back, and they wanted every child to be in school for at least a month before the summer recess. I met with the NEU, I consulted our teacher counsellors, some of them on this call. I did a survey, and that was one of the most successful surveys we've done. 1,700 parents participated in that survey. I met with head teachers, we consulted with my counterparts in London. I then wrote to the Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, and I asked him for his assurance that his school plan was safe and that the science backed it up. And I did that, Chair and colleagues, on the back of me looking after the other big portfolio, which is adult social care. And we saw there that the government, you know, it was an absolute fiasco what happened there. And there, you know, but that's another, I'm sure that's another meeting. But basically, with that experience, I was able to confront government and say, can they guarantee the safety of our schools and pupils? I still haven't had a response to that letter. Okay, the current plan for schools then, which is what we're here to discuss, is to open all pupils for their return in September 2020. And so far, there are 36 pages of guidance. And this guidance, as Nina and Jenny will explain later, change, you know, as the time goes on and as lockdown eases or tightens, whichever way it's going to go, you know, basically those recommendations will change. So far, social distancing is re-implemented through pods or bubbles, and primaries will be, when I last looked, looked, they will be in pods of classes. At first it was to be half and half, so 15, but now it looks like it will be pods of 30. Secondary schools, a different kettle of fish altogether, will be along the lines of year groups. So getting children back in school will be a massive issue. The government have recognised this, and what was their response? To impose fines. In Southwark, our response will be, and good to see that Jen is on the call, will be what we do best, to work with families to try and get all our pupils safely back in school. Okay, the big issue then will be around catch-up, and the government has committed, let me just look at the stats. They have committed 650 million to schools and 350 million to tutoring. And obviously the big issue, you know, you don't need me to tell you, I mean, we're living and breathing this. People are really worried that in the 6 months that children have not been in school, that the gap between disadvantaged pupils and their better off counterparts will widen. And basically a lot of focus, and certainly our focus, is on that. And we thought the government focus is on that. But it'll be interesting to hear what Nina says, because she's obviously been recently crunching the figures, but I think it's about £100 a pupil really. So, you know, that in itself will have other issues. And why will it have other issues, Chair? Because remember last time I came to see you, we were discussing the DSG, the dedicated schools budget, and how that was out of control. I think when I last looked, that was about between 17 and 21 million. So now we're looking at that. And don't forget, on top of catch-up, we'll be asking schools, or schools will be expected to do work around obesity. They'll be expected to work around children's mental health. Well, they are doing, they have been doing for us. So how is all that going to add up financially? So that is something we need to consider. Okay, the attendance and welfare then. Some of you ask, how has that been going? I mean, I've got the stats and I can tell you that I've been updated quite a lot. I mean, you know that in a particular period in lockdown, officers are entrusted to lead the ship, because obviously sort of local democracy is turned on its head a little bit when you're in a crisis. But I can say our officers kept us up to date quite frequently, and they've done an amazing job. I think for the case studies, what we've seen around vulnerable children, everything's gone quite well. Jenny can bring that to life with case studies. But there's something else to say. I can't completely answer your question, because in the 6 months, you know, you've got children that are known to us, you've got children that reach a certain threshold, but then there will be children who are not in the care system, who are not quite on the edge of care, but heaven knows what's happened, because basically you've got 6 months where people have been in a crisis. We know that the need for free school meals shot up like that. And so basically when we open the schools in September, we're going to have to be ready in order to deal with whatever we find really. So the vulnerability question, we've done well with the people that we know are vulnerable, but it's a moving feast really. So we need to maybe spend a bit more time on that with officers. Okay, so I've covered those points. On Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, a question on that was raised. If pupils are unhappy with their grades because of unconscious bias or, you know, or whatever reason, I understand, unless I'm corrected in a minute, is that they are able, any pupil's able to retake their exams if they don't feel the award that they've been allocated will, you know, demonstrate their needs. Southwark stands together. It's looking at how we can respond to Black Lives Matter. And one of the things that I'm doing along with Cleo, one of our teachers, our teacher counsellors, Cleo Soames, is that we're leading the education strand, and we're working with yourself, Chair, and other people to actually do a listening exercise. We're listening to young people, people that have been through our scholarship programme. We're listening to parents tomorrow. And we've already had a session with head teachers and governors. And basically we'll be collecting all that information to make sure that our offer, you know, in a climate where, I mean, basically you've got Black Lives Matter, but you've also got the issue around COVID, where, you know, Black and Asian people are almost 4 times as likely to die of COVID than our counterparts. So all of these issues need to be looked at. When we were looking at the phase 1 return, you'll remember that all the schools had to do their risk assessments, and Nina and myself and colleagues made sure that the question of what happens for pupils that are from BAME backgrounds was part of the risk assessment. Okay, so I'm nearly there now, Chair. Going forward in Southwark, we have refreshed the council plan. There is focus on the importance of the challenge ahead of us. And our performance plan, which flows from the council plan, will be targeted in many respects at how students catch up in the next period and how we get students and pupils back in school. The outcomes between children who are disadvantaged and their better off counterparts, how we can make sure that that gap isn't increasing and how we can get back to narrowing it, which is something which we do well in Southwark. And in short, our key consideration, getting all children in school, catch up, narrowing the attainment gap, identifying vulnerable. You know, we're already doing that through Jenny's amazing team early up, but what's next? And year 11s, I see that Steph and her team, Danny, are on the call, and they may want to speak about this as well. Year 11s and school leavers, making sure that they do not slip through our fingers, that they, unlike myself and Steph when we were at school in the 80s, when it was just expected that a whole layer, a generation, basically us, you know, wouldn't have any jobs to go to. So we have to really make sure that that doesn't happen to our current year 11s.
Just another minute, please, Jasmine.
Okay, that's it now. That's it. I'm finished now. I did want to say that it's girl power tonight, or woman power, because I've got with me our amazing Director of Education, Nina, and I've also got our amazing Social Care Director, Jenny. So anything that I can't answer, which is probably a lot, they'll be here to answer the technical questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Jasmine. That was a helpful overview. I have a number of questions, but I'm eager to kind of bring in other members of the Commission sooner rather than later. So I've currently got Renata and then Lynette. Renata, do you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Babudu. And just to say, you've put together an excellent report. I really appreciate all the work that you've put into getting together that fantastic report. I'm really glad that we are going to then act on in terms of exclusions and such. But going now to Jasmine, and I have concerns, a couple of concerns about and questions about the opening up of schools in the autumn. Now, with secondary schools, it's going to mean absolutely huge bubbles of sort of 200 plus in some cases with some of the larger secondaries. And I'm very concerned because they'll be travelling on public transport with other schools. You know, in London, they're all different schools are travelling together. And even if they start at different times, they're bound to be with other kids from other schools. And there's a good chance we're going to get outbreaks in schools. Do you know what contingency plans are if we start to get outbreaks in our secondary schools, because the bubbles are going to be so large and there'll be quite a lot of mixing with other kids? So that's my first question. Yeah. And my other I've got another question in relation to the autumn GCSEs and A-levels. I'm very concerned that if we get outbreaks, do you know if the government has made, because I've not heard anything, any contingency plans for those who are going to be doing autumn exams at GCSE or A-level? Because the way that the government are doing it, it's sort of a brute force moving of grade boundaries over what teachers have assessed them. So you might get lots of kids who may have ended up with a 4 in, say, English and maths, ending up with a 3, What is going to be, do you know what's going to be, for example, with Southwark College? Are they still going to take people with 3s because they wouldn't have sat any exams to get those 3s rather than 4s? And it may be just that the boundaries have been shifted by, you know, by the exam boards.
Yeah.
And also the fees are, from what I've read, that pupils are expected to pay for those autumn exams, which in terms of A-level could mean up to £100 per A-level and up to £50 per GCSE. Are they going to be, from what I gather, I think they're going to be all external candidates and be expected to pay themselves for those exams. And I'm very concerned about people, children who are low-income families which are eligible for free school meals. You know, they won't have the money to be able to pay to enter those exams. Are our secondaries going to support those pupils because they finish their education in March and they may not even finish their syllabuses on those GCSEs? I know the private schools have been, you know, running a whole summer term of online work for year 11s and year 13s, but I don't think the state schools have been doing anything for the year 11 and 13 cohort. Sorry, lots of questions there.
Yeah.
And one more, which is on the SEND pupils.
Yeah, do you want to have a go, Jasmine?
SEND pupils were supposed to be assessed in a slightly different way, that they're meant to have been allocated grades on what the grade would be expected with all their special measures like extra time, rest breaks, etc. put into place, which they wouldn't normally have in classroom assessments. Now, do you know if those will also be moved down by the exam boards, and will they have any grounds to appeal? Sorry, you may not know the answer to that. But anyway, I've finished now. Too many questions. Sorry, Jess. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so well done, Renata. Congratulations to you. You're on fire tonight. Blimey, that's 7 questions. Okay, I can answer one of them. I can answer one of them, I think. And that's the first one. Really, that is a public health question, because really, what will happen in September? The short answer to that is I have no idea. I mean, basically, by looking, you know, talking to other parents, it looks like there's a willingness for people to want to get back in school. Now, we have an outbreak plan, which is led by public health, and that basically monitors. So the reason why you've got these, and it does feel quite big to have secondary into year groups, but that might change again, Renata. If the infection level goes higher, they will make those groups smaller, I'm sure. In primaries, it was 15, now it's 30. If there are more infections, it will go back to 15, I suspect. But in answer to your question, we'll have to work to the local outbreak plan. And that is basically if, I think it's if you have 2 people in the same group, then that triggers, you know, that bubble or pod closure. I mean, basically, I can get you the exact numbers on that, but that's what will happen. That will be controlled by public health. We'll be collecting the data. And, you know, basically, that's the whole point of having bubbles and pods, that if you have over 2 infections, you can basically shut the lot down. On the technical questions, which are the GCSEs and the outbreaks, Nina, would you mind if I asked you to deal with those questions?
Yep, I can come in there as far as I possibly can. I mean, you know, I wish I knew who was writing the guidance that's coming out to schools, because it's not until actually parents and students themselves start asking the actual operational practical questions about how it's going to impact on them, then does the guidance start then unravelling. So as these issues emerge, we pick them up and then the guidance changes. So what we do know at the moment is if students are unhappy with the grade that they've been awarded, yes, they can resit, but that's a very good question that you raise about how will they pay for the resits, particularly if there are a number of resits. So I've actually got a meeting with our chair of secondary schools tomorrow. As you know, Southwark at the secondary level, our secondary schools are part of a number of large multi-academy trusts. So it's really trying to understand from those trusts what they might be putting in place for their students to support them, unless the guidance around paying for resits changes. Now, we've seen many U-turns along the way, and many changes of direction along the way around free school meals, for example, and who can access those, how they'll be paid for. So I think we need to keep raising these questions that you quite rightly raise for our students and with the multi-academy trusts about how come September young people who are not satisfied with their grade can be helped to resit. I'm afraid I can't answer the question on the Southwark College. That's a conversation that we'd need to have with Southwark College about their fees and grade decisions, and that's not a conversation that we've had just yet. So we're still busy trying to digest the mountains of guidance that came out just before the end of the academic year. I'm absolutely certain there will be more guidance over the summer, right up until we come back in September, and I think the picture will keep changing. So I've noted some of those questions down because I should take those back to the Regional Schools Commissioner as well. But I think we should keep a close eye on the guidance.
Can I just add on that, if I may? We're going to have a session at the end of August for all councillors, so that whatever we know then, just at the eve of the school before September, we will have a massive, well, I assume it will be well attended. We'll have a big session then, and we'll make sure that we've got the answers to those questions by then.
Okay.
I just put a couple of supplementary questions for Nina to maybe note down to add to the other things I asked.
Yeah, so do please have a peep at the chat, Nina, to pick up those.
Okay.
Okay. Could we just moving on with some of the questions? Could we get Lynette next, and then I've also got Eleanor and William on my list.
Eliza. You forgotten, Eliza. I did tap the hand sign.
Okay, I can't see your hand up, but okay, I'll add you too. Lynette, I can't hear you as yet. You want to try?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Excellent report, incidentally, of the of exclusion. So well done. That really reads perfectly. Thank you. Councillor Ali, good to see you again. I just have a couple of questions. It's very clear that home learning is going to continue. It's also clear that Ofsted are going to be developing some standards for home learning. And I wonder if you would like to make a comment about what possibly is going to be done by Southwark to support schools in that, or indeed have schools got resources for that, and what action will Southwark take to support schools, basically, given budgets are a disaster? I also, do you want me to ask all the questions at once? I mean, I have, yeah. Second thing is, mental health is going to be a really big issue. And we've talked about children being vulnerable, but we haven't actually talked about our staff. And it seems to me that there needs to be some sort of support and provision, both for children and staff on term. And I wondered what Southwark was going to do to plan for that. And perhaps if there will be any money available, because unless budgets that were due back in a couple of months ago, an awful lot of schools, certainly in Lambeth, were not able to balance their budgets this year. And I'm sure Southwark is not different. Yeah. And therefore, the amount of money that can be used to actually support the mental health of both staff and children is very limited on the school's budget. And finally, I know that head teachers are very concerned about the rules surrounding an infection in a pod or a bubble. That apparently guidance says at the moment, unless it's changed, that if a child or two children are infected, do have symptoms, they're to go get tested. And then if they're found to be suffering from COVID, then the pod can be closed.
That's right.
Now, given that it's probably at a minimum 4 days between the time that the infection is detected, the symptoms are detected before there is a test result, that leaves 4 days when the virus is potentially circulating in a pod or a bubble. And I wondered if Southwark were going to challenge that, or whether you would challenge that in another letter to the department.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Lynette. Great questions. Home learning. Now, Nina did actually say to me when we were in a meeting of Cabinet or PolCab that she expected the appetite for home learning to increase as a result of this exercise. Having just been home teaching a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, I won't be replicating that in my house, I'll tell you now. But anyway, where people have got underlying health issues or they're worried for their child's issue, then, you know, basically we'll have to make sure that that home learning is absolutely fit for purpose, that it replicates the curriculum learning that is going on in the school, because it hadn't before, because curriculum learning wasn't going on in the school. And then you got the lesson plans, do you know what I mean? And they were like kind of structure, but no one was really forensically marking those.
And they weren't required to either.
No, no.
They weren't derelict, they just wasn't feasible.
Yeah. So obviously we're going to have to be absolutely on top of that. If for any reason a child can't go to school because their carer or their parents got underlying health issues, that's an issue, we're going to have to look into that. And that will have to be a case by case, you know, issue. But we'll have to make sure that the home learning is, you know, much more professional than it has been up to now.
Sorry to interrupt, but if a pod is sent home, then they will need to be homeschooled.
Yeah, indeed, yes. So, you know, much more time will have to be dedicated to that, and the school will have to, we'll have to work with the schools. I mean, we work with the schools with the current state of affairs. So Nina's team, you know, will work closely with all our schools, regardless, you know, of who they are, to get that right. And there'll be a plan, and we'll be able to look at it, and we'll be able to scrutinise it rather than, you know, what we have now. Okay, mental health. Well, I can answer on the children's issue, because children and young people's mental health, if you remember last time I came, I told you that it was the priority for Southwark. And even though, you know, money is tight, I can absolutely promise you it will continue to be a priority for us. And do you remember I said that we were going to open access for children and young people? A lot of projects, I mean, basically a lot of projects didn't make it through COVID because obviously we were operating under a crisis. But I'm pleased to tell you that the Children and Young People's Mental Health Project did. It opened online. So basically that will open physically in August, and we will continue to prioritise children and young people's mental health needs. So that will help. Equally, you know, we have a dedicated officer, Lee, working with all the schools about mental health prevention. So we will carry on with that you know, that double-pronged attack on that issue, and we'll measure outcomes. So that, you know, I'm proud to say that that is happening. On the staff and the counselling, yes, I mean, basically from the head teachers, I mean, it'd be good to hear what Nina has to say, but all the head teachers that myself and Peter the leader met with, that they were basically explaining the work that they were doing, and they were making provisions for taking care of their staff. They were, if staff had an underlying health issue, they didn't have to come in to teach, children in class. And so there were all those provisions, and a lot of the head teachers that I spoke to assured me that they were going over and above. But actually, as you've raised it, we should be looking at, process in writing, really, in working under what they call the new normal. So, we need to have all that written down. And on the track and test, on the virus, I mean, it's happening in the care homes now. The tracking, I mean, it works. You can identify when you've got people that have got COVID, or they've got, symptoms of it, and they get the test, and then you can basically work with the outbreak plan. So I think, that should work, but it's made doubly complicated in it, because you talked about symptoms, but another issue is that a lot of people can be asymptomatic. Do you see what I mean? So it's like, it's not just just about,
no,
I don't mean to be crude, but it isn't just about putting a thermometer in someone's mouth before you let them in the school. It's much more, and I haven't got all the answers to that. But, basically it might be a good idea to have Jim, from public health here, because he's forensic on all of those, and he can give you the reassurances on that outbreak plan, because he basically knows it inside out. Okay, Nina, did you have anything to add on any of the next questions?
Yeah, I'd just like to say you're absolutely right, Jasmine. I think it would be good to talk to public health. We have been working with public health extremely closely throughout, and they have been brilliant. They have responded to schools quickly, in a timely manner, given them advice and support. And if people can't remember the various bits of guidance or the different rules and regs or what they should be doing, the simple thing to remember is contact public health. They will guide you through it. So and they will keep us up to date with what we need to do in schools and what schools need to do. So I think it would be good to talk to public health. I think on the mental health front, thanks to Jasmine securing us the investment into mental health in schools, that programme has come to the end of its first of the 2 years that we're running it. So from the outset, I mean, who knew COVID was around the corner? But from the outset, the intention for that money going into every school across Southwark was that there would be an investment in every school to provide for training or resource, or develop capacity and expertise in how to support not just children, but staff in schools as well around their mental health and well-being. And actually, we started that several months before the pandemic hit the UK. So we're in a good place in terms of our investment into mental health. And what we've also shared with schools is from day one. So from the time of lockdown, I sent out a daily comms to all of our schools. And that comms was about what we were doing across the council to support our children and families. And some of that, some of those messages contained a raft of resources, a lot of those around the availability of resources for mental health and well-being for children and for staff. And that's still ongoing. That's not going to stop. I think it's really, really important because there are a few mentions about what is Southwark going to do around funding, around helping schools to pay for X, Y and Z. And I'm really sad to say, but Southwark doesn't receive money to support schools from the DFE. That money goes to the DFE, and that is a national government issue. So Southwark goes above and beyond. We find ways and means, such as the investment in mental health, to supplement schools as much as we can, but we can't replace the government funding. So in terms of the home learning, in terms of school budgets, yes, they've been hit hard, but actually we have to lobby government to actually recognise the crisis that's happening in our schools and to fund that correctly. Now that lobby started a couple of years ago around the whole SEN, around the national funding formula, and actually that hasn't been addressed, and now it's been exacerbated by COVID. So I have been raising this. My counterparts across London and nationally have been raising these issues, and it's a cross-party issue. So in terms of school budgets, unfortunately, Southwark doesn't have a pot to invest in schools, but we are doing everything around that we can to support schools, to guide them, to advise them, and my team of officers will look to schools to see how they can best manage their budgets. So the money that Councillor Ali referred to earlier around the home learning and the catch up and the tutoring that the government have promised, that doesn't come to the local authority or to the council. That goes directly to schools. They will have to bid for that money. Now, some of those schools might choose to spend that money on IT to facilitate virtual learning as opposed to hard copy packs, but that will be down to schools to bid for that money and then to use it where they feel it has the greatest need. I think if anything, if Southwark Council can do anything, and again it does cross over with the government promises, is to make sure that the IT infrastructure is there, so that where families do have the hardware, the laptops, etc., that they actually have access to internet and the data that's required to do that learning. So I think that pretty much covers Lynette's questions there.
Thank you very much. Very helpful, both of you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks all. Conscious of time, so I might ask that we kind of group together the next set of questions. We have Eleanor and then William before we get Eliza in. Eleanor, do you want to go next?
Yeah, that's fine, and it's only sort of 1.5 questions. And the first one was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about children with special educational needs, particularly autistic children. You've been quite a bit in the press about the difficulties they may have been experiencing during COVID and may have in kind of returning to an educational environment, especially if they were getting kind of one-on-one support that might be quite difficult with distancing. And then second question was, I just wondered if you could talk a bit about what the kind of main like physical differences that children and parents will notice when they go to the schools. So 36 pages is a lot, and I know you can't comment on all those details, but you know, the kind of anxieties that I hear from parents in my ward is they say, well, you know, how do we know that what the government's suggesting has got any scientific backing? You know, what one parent asked me, you know, should my children and the teachers be exchanging books for marking and paper and things like that? You know, it seems insane that there's no clarity on schools, but a pub can be open with its barriers up and it's kind of taking notes and things like that. And we've suddenly been told that people need to wear masks in shops. So I think those kind of real like practical things, like how are their children going to get there? How will it physically be made safe? Are the sort of questions that I'm getting from constituents.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Well, Jasmine, before you come back, I'm going to ask William to ask his questions as well, just in the interest of time. William, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Funny enough, I have some similar question.
Good.
But I'm going to be very brief because I'm conscious of the time. The epidemic has been a tragedy and traumatizing many families. And some parents, they are very reluctant sending their children to school in September because some parents are still traumatized. Some of them doesn't want to go back to work or even sending their children to school. I'm aware that there's a fine into place for that, but I don't think a fine as a deterrent is a constructive way to deal with this mental health situation of the parents. And I think that the school should have a discussion to try to reassure the parents
Yeah.
and to bring the children
Yeah.
to school. The other question I was going to ask, fortunately, Eleanor asked the same thing, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thank you. That's very gallant. Shall I just plough in now?
Go for it.
Okay. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Eleanor. Good to see you. Thanks for your questions. Look, on the special education needs and disabilities, I've just looked at my stats, and we've got 5 out of all the schools that were open. 5 of our special education needs schools were open. So that, in one sense, that is good news for Southwark parents who wanted, you know, to use that facility. I mean, obviously, that comes on to the issue that, you know, basically William was talking about. Some parents, I mean, you know, even in mainstream schools, a lot of parents felt that, you know, they didn't want to send their children to school because of, you know, their worries and concerns about COVID. And obviously that would have been a big struggle, and it's a big struggle for everyone. So I think really the good news is that we were available, but then the other issue of that is it's about reassuring the schools working with the parents on what that home education offer would be. On the physical differences, and Nina can come in more if she wants on that, but on the physical differences and anxieties, I mean, it is interesting because it shifted, because when they were going to have the June the 1st opening, the phased return, and basically 1,700 parents filled in that, you know, Quest survey, and a lot of them were saying, look, you know, this, we're not doing it, you know, we're not going back to school. And a lot of parents voted with their feet. As a consequence, Southwark did not follow the government's deadline slavishly. We did it at our own pace when parents were ready, when the schools were ready, really. It's a different kettle of fish now. The ambience, the atmosphere, or whatever you call the tenor, it's all changed, because even with my, you know, I mean, my partner, Richard, Frankie calls him, my daughter, a COVID maniac, because he's so worried, you know, about infection and everything. And like a lot of people like that are suddenly looking at the lockdown easing, and psychologically they've made that kind of, okay, the children need to go back to school now for their own mental health. So what will happen physically is that we, you know, the education department will work with Richard Livingstone's department, transport. We will physically make sure that there's enough pavement space for adults to socially distance, and for these pods and bubbles, you know, to operate properly. So that's what it will look like. I should imagine, you know, they're also changing the times that you come in. I mean, I've got a son and a daughter, they'll be going to school at different hours of the day. So there'll be a lot of working around this. So, you know, there'll be plenty of physical differences is my answer. On William's point about, the reluctance, I think really, my answer to you, and it would be to get Jenny to talk about her experience in this, because the early help team are second to none in working with our families. And so basically we will need to do a lot of that. I honestly think that the key thing, when we were refreshing the council plan, I mean, Steph will tell you, I kept saying, the big thing will be to get all the children into school, because I think a lot of people will be apprehensive in one level. And I think, you know, some parents will have got out of that 6 months, you know, out of school. Talk about the children, a lot of the parents, you know, will have got out of that rhythm. So I think there will be a lot of work to do. And unlike the government, who talk about chucking fines at people, we're lucky. We've got early help, we've got Jenny Brennan, we've got all her team that are actually, you know, really good at working with parents of Southwark. And I think that I'm not underestimating, you know, that's a good question, and I can't underestimate, you know, the challenge that we have there.
Okay, thanks very much, Jasmine. If we could go to Eliza next, so you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Hi, Eliza.
Hi, Jasmine. I think most of the questions they asked and you answered are so that repeatedly happening for years. My concern is here and now about COVID-19 and Black Lives Matters. I wanted to see that already Council Assembly passed racial equality resolution. I want to make that as a policy and started to work now on to make sure these things are corrected. COVID-19, I'm happy I'm speaking to a lot of children, parents, teachers, although I'm shielded because the flat I live, I see so many people going around and walking. They come to me at a 2-meter distance and I ask them questions. Most of them are happy, actually, so the children going to school, but they're worried about the meal. And because a lot of the parents now going back to work, and so the school meals only for the not only for the vulnerable. I think we ought to feed during this time to all the children, because this pandemic really affects when people are weak and their immune system is low. So we must make sure our children are fed properly.
Yeah.
And the other thing, from 24th of July, face mask is compulsory.
Yeah.
And the education of children about this infection, how it spread, how we can prevent, what they can help. And there should be a peer education, because I see children, primary school children in their uniform, hugging with each other, looking at the iPhone and smartphone very closely, touching each other.
Yeah.
These things got to be taught properly. That's on the COVID side.
Great.
And on the Black Lives Matter, just a moment, we need to make sure all the council services, like education, business, in the council, everything, ought to practice in the staff are representative of the population in Southwark. And when we start to employ people, we must make sure, and also the education about the Black Lives Matter, because everyone has a different view. So we need to have discussion on that, how to go forward and implement as soon as possible. Because I see that everyone is talking, but nothing has been done, only in action on the ground level. So when you watch people, you see the difference. Nothing is being done. So then on the education side, it's important, Peter. And home learning is important. Now, lots of countries are teaching people at home through the internet. So now we are having a meeting like this, and the council services are taking place. Their job is going on exactly like many businesses are doing that. Why we can't do the same for our children? Some children can stay in their classroom, the same teacher while they are teaching, that can be broadcast to children who are at home. So they are all learning from the same teacher, same subject. And also we have to develop how to make a model to have the exams and how to teach and how to grade differently. We can't go back to the old system anymore. Things have been changing. So this has to be worked out as quickly as possible so that children
Eliza, we let Councillor Ali come back on that.
Because I would like to make sure, because it is the last
Eliza,
yeah.
Eliza, I better hurry up now, otherwise I'll chuck me out. So basically, 3 questions that you've raised there. On the free, I'm going to answer them not in the order that they came, but I'll mix it up a bit. On the free school meals, look, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that is what we've seen. I mean, basically, I work with Councillor Akoto because we managed to shift that onto a budget. I don't know how I got away with it, but the free school meals, right, basically, yes, free school meals. You know, we were one of the first local authorities to say why it was important. And actually, we've been vindicated, haven't we? Because as soon as, you know, the schools closed down, we had to be working with schools to, you know, to cook, to courier food round and everything. So you're absolutely right. I agree with you on there. On the internet connection, yes, you know, things have changed and some things have changed. Look at us, we're meeting, you know, we're meeting over the internet now. Some of the technological innovations won't go backwards, and we can use that for the advantage of the council and for our children. And you're your second point, which is my final point, was on Black Lives Matters. You're damn right, Eliza. I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why it's not just on the Labour administration. You're around the table, William's around the table, and you and I and Cleo are leading on the education. So yes, yes, and yes to all of your questions. It's in our gift. You know, we just so happen to have this huge movement behind us, which is like a juggernaut. And that is going to help us shine a light on so many of these issues, not prejudice, discrimination, but I couldn't agree with you more. Okay, thank you.
Chair, last question, very important, on ethnic minorities, Black and ethnic minorities, rate of death and infection rate is much higher, more than 50%.
4 times more. Eliza, your colleague at Council Assembly said
the reason for we must address overcrowding at school.
Sorry, I've just kind of taken the floor with my chair prerogative, just so I can keep a handle on things. I hope that's okay. You can unmute yourselves again once I open up to you. I'm conscious we have a couple hands left, but I'm going to ask if you could put your questions in the chat, please, just as you've already asked questions. Jasmine, I've just got one last one for you, really, and it builds on a prior ones. Like, I do very much understand the limited resources and role for council around certain of these activities. We don't get funded for them, but I'm especially concerned that, you know, we're talking about the fact that Black lives do matter. There's a risk of a kind of systemic bias flowing through in these estimated results, and the people who are affected by them may be the least able to challenge. And is there a role for the council in supporting, like, say, if it is that there is wide scale, like BAME people being disproportionately like kind of affected by lower than they would have expected grade, is there a role for us in helping to challenge or push against that? You've got to unmute now, though, Jasmine.
You muted me. You are talking to the right people. You're talking to me, you're talking to Eliza. And yes, because actually we've been entrusted to lead on the education on this, and we're doing the listening exercise. And, you know, that is something that's coming through when we talk to young people. So, you know, of course, we're going to have to look into this. Do you know what I mean? You know, that is something we would absolutely want to be doing. So hopefully you can leave that with me and hold us to account on that.
Okay, thanks so
Peter,
much, Jasmine. Go ahead, Jasmine. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. There was one thing I forgot to raise, and that was the issue of the bus fares. Basically, that is, you know, catastrophic, really. And I mean, basically, I know that we always say, you know, that basically we've got to pay for so much. This is like going to be a massive recession, and all of these issues are true. But actually, it would be absolutely wrong for families to have to pay £24 a week in order to get their children past 2 or 3 schools to get them to the school that they're going to. So, you know, the government, we've got to put pressure on them for all the things that Nina said, but we have to definitely put pressure on them for that, really.
Well, that's a great point to end on. I agree that it's liable to cause a lot of hardship and should be challenged. So thanks again, Jasmine, for joining us, and to you as well, Nina. Really appreciate the responses. We're conscious that this is one that we're obviously going to have to revisit to a certain extent, but it is reassuring that you're kind of thoroughly considering the key questions around this and looking at wherever the council can practically support schools. So thank you. Before we head on to
sorry, Peter, can I just say, sorry, just very quickly, we'll have a session in August for all councillors, but obviously towards the autumn, it's absolutely right we come back and get forensic on these very issues. So thank you.
Yeah, and I see Lynette is raising her hand, and I think, Lynette, you can't use the chat functionality, so I'll give you special last permission to say something too, because I know you can't use the chat. If you unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Yes, it was just one follow-up on Black Lives Matters. What resources are the schools going to be given to actually make sure that they can make the appropriate curriculum changes? And how will those be monitored by Southwark? Because it's all very well having all of these decisions, recommendations and everything else, but unless at the end of the day the curriculum is monitored and the outcomes are looked at and then action is taken appropriately, nothing will happen for the next generation and generation after that. So it really is critical that the curriculum is monitored in some way, and not by Ofsted. I mean, I don't know how, but maybe through the head teachers meetings. Yeah. I'm sure that Southwark would have a solution to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can happily say it feels like we're pushing at an open door, Lynette. Everybody is like thinking and breathing this, and the head teachers, they don't want to fall behind. And would you want to fall behind if you're a head teacher in a local authority or an area as diverse as Southwark? Do you know what I mean? Hopefully they will be putting their money where their mouths are. Everything feels like should have a price tag, but some things you just can't put a value on. Do you know what I mean? The results.
I agree entirely. I agree entirely. Right. My only worry is it does, then I'm much older than the rest of you, and I know things slip. This has been coming round and coming round for decades, for centuries. So it is important to have a structure to report it, perhaps to the Commission, and maybe the Commission can use that as one of the next subjects to.
Lynette, sorry to take your time.
That's a really helpful suggestion, Lynette. Jasmine, I'm afraid just
very
due to
quickly,
time, we come back on that.
Would you give Lynette my email? Lynette, would you like to get involved in the education Black Lives Matter?
Sure.
Okay.
Happy to pass that on. Okay. So before we move on to our next item, we are going to have a 5-minute break, just so people can look away from the screens, go to the toilet if they need to. We'll reconvene at 15:15 if that's okay. And could I suggest that people put their, you're all on mute, but maybe put your videos off for the break just in case. And I'll see you at 15:15. Okay.
Thank you. Bye everyone.
Okay, we've hit 1:15. Might give people 1 minute just to make sure everyone's back, and then get going, if that's okay. Okay, it's reached 7:16, so let's get started. So next on the agenda, item 6, and we've invited the cabinet member for, I might get the order wrong, apologies, Steph, jobs, business and innovation to speak to the commission. Now, we'll all be very conscious of the devastating impact that the pandemic has had on jobs, on business, and on the economy more generally. So, really grateful for you, Steph and team, for coming along and speaking to us about the activity that the council doing and plans to do in response. If it's okay to just kind of introduce yourself, and then hopefully 10 minutes is okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And yeah, I'm Councillor Stephanie Cryan, and Peter, you did get it right. I am Cabinet Member for Jobs, Business and Innovation. So I thought I did provide a paper, but I thought I'd talk to that paper and sort of go through that, sort of starting at the very beginning, and sort of how that journey's evolved for businesses, but also for work that we're doing, and sort of thoughts for the future as well around that. So I think, as you touched on, yes, the impacts of COVID have been very devastating on our businesses and our local economy, and actually the actual national economy in general. I think it's fair to say that at the beginning, most of the work that the local economy team were doing were fielding inquiries around financial help and support. Around that, and quite early on in the pandemic, the government did announce that they would be giving out some small business grants for companies, £10,000 or £25,000, but that did come with a caveat, and that caveat was that you had to be a business rate payer, and your business rates value, your rateable value of your business could not be more than £51,000, and that threw up a lot of problems for us actually in Southwark, because especially at the north of the borough, we've got a lot of very small businesses, so SMEs and micro businesses, that either A, don't pay business tax because business rates, because they pay that as part of their service charge to the landlord who owns the building and therefore aren't eligible, or if they did pay business rates or do pay business rates, that actually their rateable value is over £51,000. So again, they wouldn't have any eligibility there. And I just want to use this time now just to actually pay tribute to Councillor Mills and the local the Exchequer team who were dealing with those grants, and the actual speed that they got those out and getting out to the people who needed them and the business that needed them very, very quickly. So I think it was an operation of a massive scale that Vicky and her team really led to that. But as I said, it threw up some questions, and so therefore I wrote to Alok Sharma, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, outlined that. I think London councils did the same, Centre London Forward, that we're part of in Southwark, did the same around that. But we felt we didn't get a reply back. Like Jasmine said with Gavin Williamson, I didn't get a reply back from him at all. So we felt, what can we do? What can we do as a council to help support businesses? So we looked at where we had funding, which isn't very much. We had a little bit of money left from the High Street Challenge. We were just about to launch another High Street Challenge fund. And we had the Pioneers Fund, and we took the decision to repurpose those funds to provide a business hardship fund for small businesses, for micro businesses who were not eligible for those supports, and gave a lifeline to those. So they were for people with sole traders or with employees up to 10 employees, and those grants were either £2,500 for sole traders, £5,000 for businesses with up to 5 employees, and then over 5 employees £10,000. And we were oversubscribed. It was going for about 2 weeks, and we had to pull it because we became oversubscribed, which really showed the need in the borough around that. And it was something that was being picked up with my colleagues and my peers across London as well. We're absolutely saying the first thing. But I want to say, and I'm really proud of the fact that we were the first local authority to do this. We were the first local authority to actually recognise, not just recognise this as a need, because I think it was recognised, but to actually put something into action. And I know since other local authorities have followed. Obviously, a little while later, the government did follow suit and launched the discretionary grant funding around that for businesses who weren't eligible for the small business grants. But again, that was 3.4 million. So it was 5% of the amount that they'd given to local authorities for the small business grants. They only allocated 5% of that amount. So it was £3.4 million. And again, as we've seen, we had to close it early, and there is still a massive need across the borough for businesses for financial support. And I don't know whether any more will be forthcoming, to be totally honest. I think the government have now said, oh, we've done this, we've given local authorities some money, we've done our bit to help around that, but it's just not enough. It really isn't enough. And to be honest, the time it took them to do it, it was too little, too late for some businesses around that. I think if you look in the report, the furlough scheme has been very welcomed, but if you look in the report, we're still seeing, despite the furlough scheme, we're still seeing rising unemployment. And that's because some businesses, as I said, if they're not getting the financial support they need, they're going under, so they can't keep their staff on around that. And it's young people who are disproportionately being affected through this. So we've seen a rise of nearly 120% rise in UC, universal credit claimants in the borough across Southwark since March. And the vast majority of those are under 29. So it really is a crisis that is affecting young people. It really, really is around that. And I think Jasmine touched on it about the work we're looking to do and the impact it's having on school leavers. So year 11s, year 13s, and people newly graduated, because they're going out into the world, potentially into a job market that's not there. And we know that when there is a major recession, and we are headed for a very deep and very painful recession, when there's a major recession, actually people's earning potential throughout their life is severely affected. So even if you secure employment in a recession, your earning potential until you retire is lower than it would be during a boom time. And that's the thing. So it's looking at where are those opportunities for young people as well. As I said, like Jasmine, we're the same generation. I remember when I left school, 1 in 10 were unemployed. I was lucky I got a job. A lot of my friends didn't, and it severely impacted on them and their lifestyle, and actually their life chances ever since around that. So there is a massive worry about the impact this is going to have on young people. And that 120%, that 119% rise in unemployment in UC claims, that's before the furlough scheme's even withdrawn. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. And once the furlough scheme is withdrawn, we're going to see absolutely massive numbers of people going to our job centres to go and actually claiming around that, because you're taking that safety net away at a time when businesses are really, really struggling around that. And it is sectorial. We know that some sectors are really going to continue to struggle. For example, retail and hospitality. Yes, there is some easing down of measures, but we're not seeing, obviously, social distancing means that the same level of customers can't come along. People's own perceptions, I think what William said around schools, that parents are scared to send their children back to school in September. The same thing is people are too scared to go out to a cafe or to a bar or to a restaurant at the moment for exactly the same reasons around that. And, I was in a meeting today where I heard that some businesses in the north of the borough, some of the hospitality there, are not even getting 20% of the customer they got pre-COVID. So then there's a fine line to decide, do you open up or do you just not open, because the costing of that, there's a sweet point, isn't there, of where it's profitable for you to open or not. And I think what we're seeing that for many businesses, because workers aren't going back and the way offices are not opening up, that's having an impact a lot on the hospitality sector around that as well. And the hospitality sector are really massively hit, but that doesn't mean so every other sector isn't as well. I heard today, I was at a Central London Forward Skills and Employment Board meeting today, and somebody from the construction industry is there, and they said that at the beginning of the year they were anticipating that across London there would be in the region of about 22,000 apprenticeships available in construction across London. That's now been revised down to 7,000. It's a massive impact that this yeah, it's a massive impact that this pandemic is having, not just on businesses, but on apprenticeships as well. And there's a real worry around apprenticeships that firms, because they're furloughing staff, because they're not going to be taking on people, that apprenticeships are going to suffer. And again, it's not just young people, and I believe that apprenticeships should be for all ages, but we know predominantly it's young people who take on apprenticeships. And again, that's another outlet for young people, another opportunity that's being denied and taken away from young people around it. So these young people are going to be paying the price, through their taxes when they do eventually go to work, through their taxes, the price of COVID and the actual cost of this throughout is going to carry through their lifetime around that. I'm going to go back to our response as a council. As I said, we were being contacted quite as expected by so many different businesses. So we set up a business help desk, which is an email which was manned, and so that businesses could email in their inquiries and they would get a response back and help and support. And in the early days, and it was very much around, where can I get funding? How can I get support? Where can I, what happens? I can't afford my business rates. Can I have a business rate holiday if I rent from the council? All of those types of things. What we're now seeing is, as measures are being lifted and more and more, sort of is opening, more of society is opening up as such, it's more about, how do I open up in a safe way? How can I protect my staff and my customers? So we're going from those questions around finances to logistics of opening up. How can I ensure that there's safe social distance? So there's a lot of work with that. And I want to pay tribute to Danny and his team. Actually, I think the local economy team have been absolutely fantastic. They're a very small team, but they've done a hell of a lot of work over the last 3 months with many businesses around this. But I think, so we're working really closely on this with the licensing teams, with the environment team, to make sure that businesses have the information and the support they need to be able to open up in a safe way around that. Sorry, I'm off ropes going around that. So that's sort of where we were in that response. And that response, we're still there. The business help desk is going to be there for the foreseeable future. We've not got any plans to withdraw that. I think we need to have that for as long as businesses want us to have that as well on that. In terms of where we are into economic renewal, because that's where we've got to look at now. We know that we're on the edge of a massive recession, probably the biggest recession any of us will ever see in our lifetimes around that. But we have to look at, how do we renew our economy? But we have to renew it in a way that works for Southwark and for our residents in Southwark around that. So I think we're looking at an economic renewal plan that went to political cabinet last week and the chief officer team. We're going to make a few tweaks to it, but then that's going out to our partner agencies for comment. So it's going to go to the business forum, it's going to go to our skills strategy partnership as well, and we're going to go to cabinet with a final report on it in the autumn. But what that looks at is immediate, intermediate, short, medium and long-term plans. It's a whole council plan, so though it's owned by us in the local economy team and it's owned by me, it's a very much a cross-council plan. So we have to take into account the impact of planning on this, when we look at planning applications for office space going forward, the impact on the environment around this, impact on education and the opportunities for young people around that. And also, I think, as Lynette, you mentioned earlier about mental health, the mental health and well-being of people going back to work is really important. When people are furloughed, when people are sitting at home all the time and the only contact you get is through a screen, it can be really quite debilitating on people's mental health as well. So we've got to weigh all those sorts of things up around that as well. So we're looking around how can we do that? How can we tie it in with the council plan? How can we make sure that it's a plan that is movable? It's not fixed in any point of time. It's not got any fixed parameters. It moves and evolves as the landscape moves and evolves. So some things that might be medium term might suddenly become short term. Some things that are short term might suddenly, actually, they don't need to be short term. They can go a little bit sort of longer. So it's very much looking and renewing around that. And it ties very much in with the themes around our skills strategy. We've got health and well-being in there, around financial well-being, but also overall well-being. Our high streets, because we really need to look at how do we revitalise our high streets, employment and skills. And Danny, what was the other one? What's the other strand on the? I've totally gone blank.
Enough note. High streets and town centres.
Yeah, high streets and towns. Yeah, around that. So there's a massive piece of work we're looking at as well around how can we revitalise the high streets and town centres, which I'm working on with Johnson and Leo to look at how we can sort of bring back confidence and actually try to reduce, you know, sort of vacant buildings, vacant shop fronts in our high streets as well around that, because we know that once somebody leaves a high street, it get, you know, a couple of empty shops in the high street, it starts to look quite downtrodden, and people, the actual wow factor of people to go there. So it's about how do we make sure our high streets work for the communities they serve, and that's not one size fits all. I think every high street's different. So what might work for Walworth Road won't work for Lordship Lane, for example. It's got to look at those as well. We're also looking at obviously the summer statement from the Chancellor, which said a lot but not much at all actually.
Maybe one more minute, if that's okay.
Around that. So we're looking at that, and obviously have to mention Brexit, because if we don't mention Brexit, because that is also going to have a massive impact as well on that. So we're looking at how does COVID and Brexit both merging together at the same time, the actual impact around that as well. Yeah. And I'm sure I can expand more in questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Steph. So my connection's, I think my connection's a bit dodgy at the moment, so I'm going to turn off my video until it's sorted. So much there, Steph. I'll open to the Commission before I come in with my questions. I think we've got a first one from Eleanor. Do you want to go ahead, please?
Oh, I'll turn my video on. Hi, thanks, Steph. That was it's really helpful. I completely agree with you that I think, you know, when the government's furlough scheme ends, is kind of I think it's the biggest challenge facing the country. There's huge amounts of people who, you know, it's where the government has spent its money, and there are huge amounts of people who will be worried about their jobs, and you know it does look like a lot of people will lose their jobs when those furlough schemes end. And I just wondered what you and the council are doing to kind of specifically kind of quantify that risk in Southwark. So do we have a sense of kind of, you know, how many jobs it's likely to be, particularly the sectors? Obviously a lot of hospitality and retail in Southwark, a lot of jobs that rely on tourism, which obviously isn't there. We've got an airport, we've got football stadiums, all those sort of things. So you know, are we kind of doing work to quantify that, both in terms of its effects on our residents, and I guess also the financial impact on the council if there's a reduction in business rates, if there's greater reliance on some of the benefits that we provide. And then my second question, kind of leading on from that, was just seeing the news on Marks and Spencer's today. I just wonder if you're talking to some sort of the bigger employers, particularly that are kind of that employ a lot in Southwark as well, and if we have a sense of like what that impact's likely to be.
Yeah, I'll start with the second one first. Yeah, we are. I mean, it's so worrying. We see company after company now. We are relying on job, you know, announcing job losses, and this is a pattern that's going to continue. This is not just going to stop now. It will continue. But yes, we are talking to businesses. We're working with businesses to see how we can help support around that. I speak to the biz. Daddy and I have a meeting with the bids every Monday morning. And they bring up, and they're really well placed because most of our larger employers are based in the areas where the bids are, and they're very clued up and around what plans are and what's happening around it. The biggest risk is, I think, for retail and hospitality. We're not going to see the tourism trade picking up, although I know that a lot of tourism sort of companies, including some of those based in Southwark and Merlin on the south, though it's just into Lambeth, Merlin, who own the London Eye in Southwark, have actually written to the government now saying there needs to be a boost and support for tourism-based attractions, because they just cannot continue. And it's the same with the theatre industry. You know, we've heard Oliver Dowden announce a revival package for industry, but for you know, for theatres and for culture. But it's always the devil's in the detail, and it seems it's so frustrating because the detail seems to take so long to come down. It really does. We never get the detail for a while. We still haven't heard all the whole detail about the Kickstart yet. In fact, it was announced 2 weeks ago, and it's really frustrating. You know, we announced that hardship fund, and we had the parameters and the whole application process and things ready to go before we announced it. And it frustrates me. So yes, we are talking to businesses around that. I think the other thing we really need to look at as well is how can we persuade those businesses, and I think there's those conversations happening where they don't actually where staff don't physically need to be there to continue working in ways that help support jobs around that. So if people can only just need to go in 1 day a week and can work from home 4 days a week, how can we facilitate that to try and prevent potential job losses around that as well? And I think one of the things we're looking at in the council plan refresh is absolutely want to look at a Green New Deal and look at where can we find jobs, because although there is so much doom and gloom at the moment, there are opportunities that will present themselves around that. And I think some of where those opportunities will be in tech industries, because that will still be a growing industry, and I think around sustainable and green ventures as well. So we really want to tie that in with our work that Richard's doing with the climate emergency, and look and have a massive commitment to a Green New Deal and green jobs as well to help. And our skills strategy will look at how can we help upskill and retrain people into those types of jobs as well around that. And then the furlough scheme, yeah, it is the tip of the iceberg. It's a London-wide problem. It's something we're having conversations, not just at a local level, but with London councils as well around that. I think we're pretty lucky that Peter's having those conversations as chair of the Resilience Board as well. I know Georgia Gould from Camden, in her role with Jules Pipe on the GLA as well, are actually going to government with asks around that support around that. But I just feel that unless the furlough scheme's continued, or there is some sort of version of it, that you're going to get a whole load of people absolutely falling off a cliff edge around that. I really do. And that is a big worry. And I share that worry, Eleanor. I really do. It scares me. It really scares me. The number of people that were in jobs that were pretty secure are just going to be let go and made redundant because of this, because of COVID, because the companies just not getting the income in they need to support the staff that they've got.
Thanks, Steph. Really worrying. I've got a number of questions, but just to check, Danny, did you want to come in on that point, or you're still on mute, Danny?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, just to mention very quickly as well about Southwark Works, we're undertaking, as part of the renewal plan, we're undertaking a review of Southwark Works, which is the council's employment support service, to make sure that that's got the resource it needs to support Southwark residents in what is going to be a really challenging labour market, particularly for those who are kind of further from work and further from jobs. We're going to have a lot more people who have probably recently lost their job and therefore are going to find it much easier to get work, and those people that are going to struggle are going to find it even more harder than they were sort of pre-COVID. So making sure that Southwark Works has got the resources it needs to be able to support those residents most effectively is one of the key things we're looking at as well.
That feels really right. Okay, so in terms of questions, we've got Lynette up next. Lynette, do you want to go ahead?
I fully appreciate, and you've obviously done an awful lot of work, and it is going to be tragic for thousands of people. What I do want to ask is, for those companies that are secure, supermarkets, various other companies that will weather the storm, how does Southwark imagine that they are going to approach such companies, or with companies that they are going to tender contract for, to ensure that they can be accountable for Black Lives Matters and apprenticeships? So how is the data going to be gathered from those people who do manage to see out this this tragedy of unemployment?
So, Lynette, we've already got links with the major supermarkets and actually with Southwark Works. And actually, when the pandemic first started and Supermarkets were taking on staff to handle the additional delivery demands and the demands that were placed on supermarkets. Actually, Southwark Works were really well placed, and we're advertising those jobs around that on there. In terms of the Black Lives Matters, I'm actually holding 2 listening events, one this Thursday around employment, and that's very much around not just getting into employment, but once you're in employment, how do you progress into work as well? What are those structural inequalities that exist in the workplace that prevent some of our Black and Asian minority ethnic residents from progressing maybe as far as they should do? How do we break that glass ceiling for them as well around that? And also, how do we help support people into work? So I'm holding that listening event on this Thursday, and then next Thursday I'm holding one with businesses themselves to look at our BAME businesses to see what issues and concerns they have. And I think although that's around Black Lives Matters, I think COVID does have a role in that as well. And I think the whole idea is a listening events that we can then listen to those, ask what they would like, what people themselves want to see as the solutions. And that will become as a bigger piece of work. I think Jasmine mentioned on around education. There's one around culture. There's one around the police, there's one around communities, and Johnson Situ is going to be is leading on the whole piece of this. We're pulling that all together to look at how we do better, how can we do better, not just us, but how can the borough do better, and that includes employers as well. I'm going to be going to the business forum. Sorry, I was muted. Someone mutes me. We're going to be going to the business forum as well with the findings as well, because I want to make a commitment around. I want businesses to make a commitment to Black Lives Matters and take it seriously. And Councillor Situ and myself have written out to I think it's over 5,000 businesses in the borough around this as well, with some pledges, and we've had some very positive responses around businesses sharing with us for work they're doing as well around that. So we are monitoring in it, and we will continue to monitor it. But I think it comes back to what you said earlier, isn't it? This isn't just something for now. This has been with us for so long, and we really need to. Now is the time to actually tackle it, and make sure that we change things for the future.
And the people who have survived are accountable for those two issues.
Yeah.
Okay, we've next we've got a question from Renata. Renata, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Thanks, Steph. Thanks for your great report and your presentation. Now, it's become clear from all the data that's coming out that it's disproportionately women who are going to or have lost their jobs, and also younger people. Are we going to be working with employers that are expanding and doing well to set up more apprenticeships to help people to, who've lost their jobs to move into a different career path?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's it's no surprise, is it, that on the week that schools break up, there's an announcement of everyone go back to work now. Taking no account that women. It's not always women have childcare responsibilities, but women predominantly have childcare responsibilities around that. Yes, I think what we're looking at is we're refreshing our skills strategy. So part of that we'll look at where do we need to look. We'd already recognised hospitality and health and healthcare as areas where we wanted to sort of focus on in terms of our ongoing skills strategy. I think it's really we're refreshing that, looking at what is now needed sort of coming through COVID. I'm not going to say post-COVID, because we don't know if we ever will be post-COVID. This could be with us for quite a long time unless we get a vaccine. So, I think post-COVID is a bit premature. So, but what we're looking at as we transition into future phases of this. So absolutely, we want to make sure that the opportunities are there for young people, for women around that. And that comes as part of that in-work progression piece as well, I think. I think sometimes, again, women are, because I think what COVID's actually shown is that we know in terms of women sort of climbing up through the ranks in work. We know with the gender pay gap that there's sometimes a lot of companies, and their larger companies, put a lot of pressure and say they won't promote women because they need someone to be at the office, 8 to 8 at night and around that. I think what COVID's shown actually is that you can actually work around that, because we're all online. We can work at home, we can work online, and I think actually that ceiling can be shattered now because of this. I think there's no excuse. That old excuse can be blown away around that. But I think it's incumbent on people like me, and then people hold my role, to actually hold businesses to account for that, and actually mention that, and actually continue to challenge around that, which I will continue to do. In terms of apprenticeships, I'm worried about apprenticeships, Renata. I'm worried about apprenticeships because, as I said, hearing today around, I've been worried for quite a while about it, because we know that the level of apprenticeships have been dropping off, that 43% of apprentices are actually on furlough at the moment as well. So they're at risk. And the fact that, just in construction alone across London, potentially 22,000 apprenticeships this year has been shrunk down to 7,000, just shows actually that there is a massive risk to apprenticeship. I think I wrote to the Prime Minister, haven't had a reply back from him, but I wrote to him asking him to make a guarantee around, because he was making noises about saying, maybe we should give every young person the opportunity for an apprenticeship. So I wrote to him asking him to commit to that. I know the Chancellor said something in the autumn statement, but again, we've not had the detail around what that would look like properly, or indeed the costings on that as well. But I think apprenticeships is a worry, it really is. But I think one way to help young people, is if when young people come to leave school, actually not leaving education and maybe going on to vocational training and skills may help. First of all, gives them sort of more skills to actually then go into the job market, but actually defers them going straight away into a very depleted, very depressed job market as well.
Okay, thanks, Steph. I've got a few questions of my own, but there's also a question from Councillor Hungbo, who sends his apologies he had to leave. And I think the question's essentially.
Yeah, Eliza want to ask her question as well.
Okay, Eliza, you want to ask as well? Sure.
Because the hand sign is not on my screen.
Okay, no problem. So I'll ask William's one, then Eliza, you can say yours after that. Eliza's is, sorry, yeah. William's is, what measures do we have in place to reduce the economic challenge of any possible future kind of second wave or kind of localized lockdown? So if you've got any thoughts around that. Steph, before you come back, let's let Eliza ask her question too.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, and I know it's a difficult time when the council is trying to do their best regarding the jobs and also supporting the business. My concern is Southwark has a large number of refugees, and some of them haven't got the status, so they can't. When they go into the link in the Southwark website, the question they're asking, they haven't got the answer, so they are not getting any help at all. So virtually they are starved. Then it's getting a domestic violence, lots of problems for those communities. I thought the Prime Minister said, whatever status people are in, we mustn't stop helping the people. Especially in the pandemic time, we cannot discriminate who has got the status or who hasn't. They should have the treatment, they should have the food, and I have had lots of complaints. People don't have anything, and I wonder whether have you got any provision for these people, or the council is doing something for them?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I'll come to yours first, Eliza, then I'll answer William's. Yeah, I think you make a really good point around that. I thought I don't know if anyone else watched the Select Committee, but I thought it was absolutely shocking when the Prime Minister didn't even know what no recourse to public funds was. Who actually does his casework as an MP is probably what you'd ask, sort of gather from that one. I think you're right. I think what this pandemic has shown is inequality has always been there, but this has really highlighted and shone a spotlight on a lot of inequalities. And actually, the status of refugees and no recourse to public funds is one of those. one of the things I think the council have done really well, and it's not me and it doesn't sit in my portfolio, is the community hub and the work that the community hub is doing to help support people. And that support is there through the community hub for anybody in that situation around that. So, you know, we will not discriminate against anybody at all, and nor should we. Absolutely, nor should we. And so what I would say, Eliza, is in that respect, send them to the community hub, refer them to the community hub, and we can do that as councillors. We can make those referrals ourselves, whether it be for advice or for support or for food. Around that, that's there, and please do make use of it. If it's in terms of employment, again, you know, refer them to Southwark Works. We can always talk to them around that as well. But there is help and there is support out there for people around that. And so thank you for bringing that, because I think it really is a very important subject. And thank you for championing it as well on that.
Because I mentioned it to the minority community's family, actually they're mentally affected by these pressures, and they kill their babies because they don't want to see their babies suffering without food and in hungry. So I felt, you know, that we allowed that to happen. It shouldn't have happened. So that's what I want to make sure. They said they went to the link and there's nothing for their category. So the question they asked, they don't have the answers. And that's what I thought. How are you supporting them? Is there any way they can get in? Of course, I can advise them. They can, or they can ask their councillors to really put their names in the community hub. Thank you. Yeah.
No worries at all. And there's a dedicated email. If it's COVID support, is the email. So if you just send it to them, and they're great. They get. I've done casework for it, and you get a reply pretty straight away actually on it. And then in William's one, you know, it is a worry, isn't it, again, around sort of a second wave where the whole country could potentially be locked down, which is different to local lockdown around things as well. But again, I think, which Jasmine touched on, Evelyn is leading on the resilience and response to the pandemic and future waves around that. So there is a bit in there around sort of business as well. I think we're a little bit sort of stuck, but if a directive came down, if we had a situation like Leicester, where a directive came down to say that, you know, sort of pubs and bars had to close for a period of time again, that's going to affect those sectors around that. And there's not really much we can do around that. I mean, I'm pretty reassured with Southwark's, the figures I've seen for Southwark at the moment, but we're not at a stage yet where we would need a local lockdown, if at all, around that. That doesn't mean to say that, you know, once the autumn winter comes, that actually there is a second wave, which means that, you know, it becomes inevitable around that. But I just feel that as much as you plan against it, you can't, if businesses have to close, they're going to have an impact. And I think, and unless the government, again, put their hand in their pocket and help on this, because, you know, they're going to have to, it's going to be worse. The second wave will be worse than the first one for a lot of businesses. They're going to have to provide the same sort of support they provided before.
Okay, thanks, Steph. So if I could just ask my questions that haven't been totally covered already. They're all about the economic recovery, really. So they're forward facing. Really impressed by the emergency response work. The first was just in terms of the economic renewal plan. The areas that you highlighted, I just wondered if, as well as breaking out business, is it worth making quite explicitly clear that, like, kind of community businesses or social enterprises or just something that gives clear reference to those is made in there, given that with the extent of, like, kind of crisis we're dealing with, we're going to need to be thinking quite differently about, like, how the local economy works and the amount of kind of community wealth that we can secure. So that's kind of question one. Question two was I did raise this one on main overview and scrutiny review. I just want to check, as we're thinking about the recovery and the kinds of support that businesses and entrepreneurs need. You've said that the intention is to recapitalise the Pioneers Fund in due course. I just wanted to check if that remains the case. And then my final question just builds on the next, really. Big businesses are going to continue to exist, and it feels like they've got a really kind of critical role. But just could I check on your responses? Were you saying that we will be looking to try and do more apprenticeships with big business, or did you not say that?
Yes, I did, and I do want to. I think that's where the apprenticeships are going to have to come from, around that. But I think it's about selling the benefits of that to them, working with them and getting on board, which I think is the role where actually having a business forum, which involves some of those big businesses, really does help around that, on that. And we've got to look at where those apprenticeships are, because I think, you know, apprenticeships, I think we've been really great as a local authority of apprenticeships. You know, we're recognised as being really great for apprenticeships. And I don't want to lose that sight of that. I really don't. So we will be pushing for apprenticeships as and when we can. I think there has to be a rethink of the Apprenticeship Levy and how that's used as well as part of this. It's not been fit for purpose. We see too many businesses using the Apprenticeship Levy to actually do in-work, calling people apprenticeships that are already employed by them to give them training up to the next level. And for me, apprenticeships really have to be those entry level, to the detriment of the entry level apprenticeships. So it's being spent a lot on higher level apprenticeships, which is much needed. You know, there's nothing, I agree with high level apprenticeships, but we're seeing more high level apprenticeships and less level 2 and 3 ones, which for me, when you've got young people leaving school and actually going into their first work environment, actually those entry level apprenticeships are going to be even more important in terms of helping through through a recession that we're going to have on that. So yes, we are, and we are hoping we will not give up on apprenticeships. And I think we've been looking around the council plan and the commitments, and one of the things we've got to look at is the impact of this pandemic that it's having on the local economy. Is where are our priorities? And jobs and apprenticeships absolutely have to be there, and how much do we attribute to that budget wise? Actually, how much do we put at this? Is this going to be a really big ticket thing like we did with swimming gyms? Is this going to be a real big ticket thing that we have to put money there? And I'll be arguing the case for that, actually, that we actually do. Pioneers Fund, yes, I want that money back. I think there's a consensus amongst cabinet that money should be repurposed back as well on it, and it would be absolute tragedy if it didn't, Peter, because I think the work that you put into that was absolutely amazing. You know, I'm the custodian of it at the moment, but I'm just a custodian. It was your work that led to this, absolutely. And it was a Pioneers Fund in 2 ways, wasn't it? It wasn't just a Pioneers Fund for pioneers and for entrepreneurs and businesses. It was actually a pioneering fund as well. It's the first of its kind around that. So I think that we absolutely do need that. And in terms of community wealth building, yes, I want to see us rebuild the economy in a way. I think this, I talked a little while ago about opportunities, and I think there is an opportunity to do things differently and to look at community wealth building, where our community sharing that wealth and that benefit, where jobs go to local people, where we support social enterprise, where we promote cooperatives around that. And I actually think we've got, we can actually do that going forward, and I think that's with a new Green Deal is really the way to go for the future around this. And I also want to link back into, though it's not my portfolio, the report that this commission did around procurement, which I think was a really, really, really great report. I was reading it and I was absolutely blown away by it. I thought absolutely got the essence of it all. And I think part of that community wealth building is about not just the council, but we do need to do it as a council, but all those big organisations, is looking when they do their procurement that they procure locally and help and support local businesses around that, because actually it's better for them and their economy and their economy, but it helps the communities that they're based in as well. So I would like to see more community wealth building and actually looking at local procurement around that as well.
Chair, can I just want to add a question to your question about apprenticeship? And
Sure,
is
if
it
it's
possible
brief.
for the council to reduce their council tax or the levy you made on the businesses and make them to take apprenticeship? Bargain with the big businesses like that.
So before you come back, Steph,
Reduce-
could I just check, Lynette, did you have one last thing you wanted to ask as well? Or is your hand not supposed to be up? You're on mute. I think
No, I have a question. Oh, it was answered with
great.
your question.
Okay, great. All right. So Steph, go ahead.
Can I go back? I'll come back to Eliza. So business rates doesn't actually sit with me. That sits with Vicky Mills. But I think the thing about business rates is that obviously you know that we get so little funding from the government at the moment, and we're looking, you know, the government at the beginning of this pandemic, the government said spend all local authorities, spend what you need, just spend whatever it takes and you'll get that money back. And their stance now has really rode back to we're all in this together and we'll only give you a certain amount of money now, which means that we're looking at massive budget gaps. You know, there could be potentially a £30 million hole in our budgets. And the way we raise money is through council tax and through business rates. And if we were to reduce business rates, I think we'd have to really seriously consider the benefits of doing that for apprenticeships compared to what is that business rates money being spent on that we're already delivering, because a lot of that business rate money does go back into the local economy team for the work we're already doing around our work streams as well. So we'd really have to sit and look at that. So I can't say today, yes, let's do that, because I think we'd have to look at all the nuances around that and all the different ways. You know, if you take it from it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul, and what suffers if you do that. So it's part of a bigger. It's not as simplistic as just, you know, saying, yeah, let's do that.
Okay, Steph. Thank you so much for preparing the report for us, which was super helpful to have in advance, and for all of your responses to those questions were really helpful. And I think the Commission kind of looks forward to kind of working with you going forward as we further develop the economic renewal plan. And
happy to bring that back to you guys.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Danny. I'm going to suggest that we take another 5-minute break, or before we go on to the next item. So I've got 8:02 now. So if we come back at 8:07, and if people could switch their videos off again before they leave. Cheers. Hi all. I think we're all returning. Great. Well, we've got. I can see a decent number of faces, so I'll head on, and I'll head on. And just to say, this will definitely be our last, the last part of today's meeting, and I'll try my best to keep things moving. I'm conscious that it can be particularly hard to do late meetings at home, so we'll try and wrap this up as quickly as we can. So next item we have, or the next two items, relate to the reports that this commission's produced over the last year. So we'll start off with item 7, the exclusions and alternative provision report. And just we've included this here so that the Commission can note the final version of the report, which was submitted to Cabinet on the 14th of July. And the Cabinet response should be considered either at their 15th of September meeting or their 20th of October meeting. So at that point, we'll get responses to all of the recommendations. I mean, I wanted to once again just thank the Commission for all of the work that they did that fed into the report. And just to kind of quickly headline, I presented the report to Cabinet on the 14th of July. I highlighted the range of findings of the Commission from the challenges we had with kind of identifying accurate data, some of the concerns we had around the quality of data that the officers were receiving, our real concerns around the disproportionality of exclusions to certain groups, both in terms of race-based groups, but also those with special educational needs, and in receipt of free school meals. And I quickly ran through all of the recommendations that flowed from our findings. The response from Jasmine was very much positive, as you heard earlier in this meeting. Her immediate line was that she in terms of the recommendations she saw, she couldn't see any that they wouldn't agree with, but let's wait until the formal response. What I'm really eager to do is make sure that this Commission plays a continued role in making sure the recommendations are actually implemented, because it's quite easy for those to get lost. So I'll make sure that this is a returning item, and I think it should be a regularly revisited one on any future Commission's agenda. It's worth saying it remains to be seen who will be on the Commission September and beyond. But in any case, I'll make sure that the case is put that we should continue to revisit this. Are there any? This item was really just to note and to make sure I gave you an update. But did any members want to come in on anything or ask any clarification questions on that? Great. Okay, fantastic. So the next item just relates to the other reports that went to Cabinet. So item 8 is on the procurement report, which touched both on the accessibility of procurement and social value more generally. And the report received a similarly positive response. Vicky Mills, the Cabinet member for Finance, Performance and Brexit, gave the response, and the concern she flagged, which I pushed back against actually, was that as a council we have a lot of services that are in-house. So she said that our potential for taking on some of the social value related recommendations may be somewhat limited. And I think this is a really good one for the Commission to keep an eye on, because even though we do a lot in-house, we still procure lots of services. So there's lots of potential for making sure that we maximize social value whenever we can. And just in light of Brexit and the coronavirus pandemic, any scope that the council has to do more to help build community wealth, it should be doing, regardless of whether we have a lot of services in-house or not. So yeah, the the formal response to that will come either in the 15th of September cabinet meeting or the 20th of October as well. But before this commission can check in on it further. Any questions or comments on that report? Okay, great. So now on to the last item of business, and that's the work programme for 2020-2021. Now, you will have received, apologies it was last minute, but you will have received a supplemental agenda item today, supplemental agenda item number 2, which contains contents from the work programme that we had over the last year. And this was really just to kind of nudge our thinking along, combined with the 2 interviews that we did earlier today, just to start thinking about what we might suggest is covered by the commission next year. Now, we're doing this even though it's often it will be revisited in September. But given that this commission has we've worked together for a year, thought it'd be helpful for us to just set out our initial thoughts on what we think the commission should be focusing on over the next year. I won't read through or highlight too much from the work programme, just to say that we looked at a range of topics which were a bit broader than which were quite broad in focus, but it was in recognition of the fact that this commission is, although it's titled the Education and Business Commission, as a scrutiny commission, it can be somewhat roving. So it's been set up so that it can pick up issues which cross-cut departments and which wouldn't be caught neatly elsewhere. So that's why we see items such as looking at race disparity across Southwark, questions around kind of care leaver provision. It's been, but because housing's quite overloaded, it was agreed with them that if we were interested in looking at rogue land laws, that's something we have space to do. And we'd historically looked at high streets as a possible subject of interest. So I'll open up to others to just kind of share some of their thoughts about what we might focus on. But my initial thought is the coronavirus pandemic and Brexit creates such fundamental challenges for just how we'll ensure that education is really working for children across Southwark. And it presents such an obvious risk to just the viability of high streets, town centres, and business more generally in the borough. So it feels like in some way that needs to be a core part of a core part of what this commission looks at. Is my initial thought, but I'll open up for people's reflections, suggestions in terms of what the commission might focus on next. Carl, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I was thinking one of the big things that came up in this meeting and that we're talking about in my school currently is attendance and the reluctance of parents to send their children back in September. And I think it would be good to have a running theme around school attendance. So because it might become clear in September that we've got certain groups that are not going back and what we can do about that, because clearly we don't want to be fining poorer people if they actually just don't feel comfortable going back.
Good point. Good point, Carl. I'll note that. Do any others? Oh, I see someone's on the chat. No. Oh, that was just Carl. Great. Eleanor, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, I was about to thank.
By September, am I allowed to speak, Chair?
Apologies, Eliza, because I can't see you or anything. Eliza, do you want to go quickly, and then Eleanor, you can come in after?
Yes, it is very quickly, because by September, our vaccine from Oxford University Laboratory is available. They already started first phase. Now they are starting a second phase. I wonder how we could join the number of vaccination is available in the program, whether the teachers and the vulnerable children Now, whether we can get the vaccination to protect them. So, but in conversation with the public health, we need to find out how to introduce the vaccination to the school, because children and teachers are going to go day in and day out for 300, almost 300 days in a year. And this pandemic is not going to stop. In September, it's expected to go for 2 to 3 years. And so otherwise we have to allow children to study from home, or only small number of people allowed to the school. If we can have at least pilot study for these schools and teachers.
So if I heard you correctly, that was whether we suggest something around piloting vaccinations with schools or teachers. I mean, it does feel like a difficult one for us to pick up in some ways, but maybe the kind of more general point there is the kind of health and safety of reopening, kind of more generally, and what the council's doing to make sure that that's appropriately prioritised.
Yes, they have to bid for the number of vaccination. It's only certain 1 million or something available. So whether we can get some of them for a pilot study, if it works, then we can go for more schools and so it is very important to protect our children education. We already seen poor mental health well-being, and their grades are dropping. So we must do everything we can to protect the children and their education. We don't want to let a couple of generations back.
Okay, thanks, Eliza. If people have any reflections on that, they can come in after, but let's go to Eleanor first.
Thank you. Yeah, agree. These are non-COVID related, if that's okay. So yeah, agree with Carl's point on attendance. I think it's a really good one to flag. Just two other things, and I know it's kind of odd because we're suggesting things for a future committee, but we have discussed Brexit, so we'll know at that point whether it's been a no-deal Brexit or not. And I think that would obviously sit within this commission's view, how the council's responding to Brexit challenges. And the second one I had, which is hopefully not too kind of sweeping, but has been kind of affecting my casework a lot recently, is the kind of council's relationship with big new tech companies. So I've had a number of like Airbnb parties in my ward where Airbnb have been, pretty useless, like pretty non-committal. A lot of the traffic changes in our ward, like we're actually really reliant on what things like Google Maps and Waze do, and the council doesn't really seem to have relationships with those kind of companies in the way that, like Steph was talking about, supermarkets or Marks and Spencers. So just thought it was quite an interesting thing, like really challenging, and they just kind of are a bit above the law, really, or above the kind of powers that we have as a council. So that's quite a sweeping one, but just something I've been dealing with a lot.
Yeah, it's really useful to have some quite different ideas floated. So yeah, that's a really interesting one, Eleanor. Do others have any thoughts about where the future commission may focus?
I have a quick one here, introducing human rights as a subject to curriculum.
Human rights. Okay, and
even UN is promoting, they wanted more schools to teach human rights to children.
Okay, human rights, promotion of human rights. Okay, all right, thanks, Eliza. Lynette, you have your hand up.
Yes, given that employment for youth is not just apprenticeships, is there any way of linking the FE sector, the HE sector, apprenticeships, so that there is a clear view of what can be done, what strategy can be used by Southwark to have some sort of synergy between all those that either provide apprenticeships or lead into apprenticeships, and see whether there is some synergy there. Because if we really are going to grips with the youth in Southwark, education, business, commerce and industry are all going to have to work together to support those children. I don't know whether that's possible or whether it's too wide-ranging, but that there is some sort of synergy there, and that we could look into each aspect of how children will be employed, how they can get into employment, etc. Whether that's through education, through an apprenticeship, you know, what Southwark are doing to find jobs in industry and in commerce.
Okay, thanks, Lynette. That is an interesting suggestion. Eleanor, I see your hands up in the flesh.
Yeah, it was just a really short comment, and about all of these things. So I sat on a couple of scrutiny commissions now, and we interview lots of really interesting people. And something that's always really irritated me is that we've never had anyone from City Hall. I would not criticise the mayor or the City Hall administration, but it's across the road. And, you know, and I know there's lots of links at the leaders level, but it would be good, you know, it's right there. A lot of the issues that we deal with are London-wide issues. It would be good for someone from City Hall to come and talk to this committee about education and business and some of those specific things we're looking at. So just something that's always irritated me for the scrutiny.
It's a good point. Definitely one we can look into. Whatever we're looking at, there'll be somebody relevant in City Hall for it. And just one thing I didn't flag on the that was on the long list last year, and still feels relevant, is youth provision in the borough. It's an interesting one that it's council's currently in progress on it, of reviewing youth services across the borough, and they've been consulting young people. On its kind of current timeline, there is potential for some level of like kind of pre-scrutiny in terms of the process for deciding what services are provided, or even kind of looking at the rollout of it. Is that, what do people think about that? Lynette, you were reacting.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, I think that sounds good, because that would be all inclusive, really. If it's, and then you can narrow it down from it being a very wide perspective, and decide what the commission includes in that.
Yeah. So it could have like a first session which is quite macro, looking at what's being done, and then it narrows down based on the commission's interest.
The areas that are really salient.
Great suggestion. Okay, there's quite a few ideas there, which I'm sure we can kind of work up so that they can get a bit of further consideration in September. And the first session can be whoever happens to be the chair, starting the conversation on at least a couple of those as well. And so we've reached the end of our agenda now, but there's one thing I'd like to loop back on. We had a couple points where there seemed to be quite specific questions, suggestions to either cabinet member on their area, and I just wanted to check that those have been sufficiently captured so that there could be like at least a kind of follow-up mail on them. And so I had notes which I'm struggling to find now. The one for Steph on the business front was making sure that the economic renewal plan appropriately appropriately recognises social enterprises, has some commit. Well, I think that was one, and then the second was for big business that the council should be looking to have some commitment to do more apprenticeships, if possible, within the borough. Were there any other things for on the business side where we just wanted to try and immediately go back with a kind of first suggestion for the cabinet member? No? Okay. And then were there any such suggestions in people's mind on the education front? One I picked up a bit was on the, I'm not sure if Lynette's suggestion in regards to Black Lives Matter, that there's some clear council plan about like the role it could play in making sure it finds its way onto. I'm not sure I'd word it right, Lynette. Maybe you can. Maybe you can.
It's about accountability, really, isn't it? And how you can work with schools and within the council itself and businesses to make people accountable for acknowledging that Black lives do matter, and to collect data so that it's clear what is happening, and investigate where people are required to account for themselves, why they're not. Does that sort of sound possible?
I mean, well, it needs a bit of thinking, but my initial thought is like that there's potentially going to be like voluntary commitments of some sort around this. So it could as much be framed as like that the council should have some plan for trying to make schools accountable to their public commitments regarding curriculum changes in light of Black Lives Matter or something along those lines. So the council at least knows what happens and makes some efforts to kind of track progress.
Chair, I just want to make a caution on this.
So go ahead, Eliza.
Yeah, when you say Black Lives Matter, if you started to notice those things to children, it might, fire back. Then people started to see the difference among themselves as a two students rather than as a one community, one family, one life. That's what we need to promote in school. But in GCSU, when they come to that level, they ought to be taught about different history of people, different communities from Africa, West Indies, Asia, and things like that. They ought to teach their history and where they come from. And everyone has a very rich history in their own country. And
excuse me, Liza. Excuse me. That's the whole point of reflecting Black Lives Matters across the curriculum and to revise the curriculum across the curriculum in terms of acknowledging history. It's not only history, it's geography, it's everything.
Everything, yes.
It's the whole lot. So it's about curriculum change. If the curriculum changes, then the next generation will be on the front rather than the back foot. And that's the way change happens.
Yeah, that's what we've got to be careful, otherwise we might.
Eliza, I just say my reflection on this would align a lot with Lynette's. I mean, you get taught. I agree, it's not just about history, but you get taught history at all ages, and so there's a need for reflection way beyond GCSE. And it's a question like
they're big enough.
Sorry, Eliza. If we speak at the same time, it doesn't really work. It needs to be like kind of age appropriate in all cases. But I see no age. I see no clear kind of age problem that it be done at younger ages as well. And I'm not sure if I fully understood your point, but.
Because I've done some work with different communities, and I know exactly some has been successful, some backfired, and very badly. So the person who is going to teach or guide or lead must have a proper understanding how to instill to the children. Children are children. We mustn't make them to see different among themselves.
And So sorry, Eliza. I'm going to have to. I'm just going to have to cut you off there. I am a bit conscious of time, and that we probably can't do justice to the debate here, but I've at least kind of noted the point. So so thanks very much all. Everton, I don't think I've missed anything off there. Are we good? We covered all our bases?
You have. The only thing I'd ask you to consider is whether or not there's anything you want to take off the list at this stage, so we don't keep rolling it forward.
Well, I mean, I'm all for like kind of thinning down the work program, but I kind of want to leave that work to next year's iteration a bit. Like, could we? But perhaps it's just we seem to have expressed more interest in some than others. So it could maybe it's just about making it a suggested priority list or something along those kind of lines, so that it's at least clear what we thought was particularly interesting. Okay. Commission members okay with that, or do you want to try and start culling it now?
You don't have to if you're tired, Chair. I just thought it would save it from going forward, but if you've had enough, then that's fine with me.
I can go all night, but I think it's fair on the hard-working commission that we probably call it a day about there. Thanks, everyone. This last, well, more than a year now has been an absolute pleasure working with you. And I think we're well on the way to like making some really positive change happen in the areas we focused on, which is really encouraging. On that note, I'll bid you all good night. Thanks for that. Okay, take care all.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chair.
Bye. Bye.